Good morning, and welcome to the North Chapel. This is Sunday, the 25th of June, the last Sunday in the month, and luckily we have some sun and nice weather today. One announcement that I've been asked to make is that next Sunday, July 2nd, we will be welcoming new members to the church, and there will be a potluck and a pizza party immediately following. Yes?
It's actually the 9th. It's a typo, I'm sorry. It's the 9th.
Oh, it's the 9th. Okay, it's a typo in the front then. Okay, sorry, the 9th. Okay, someone told me differently. Okay, the 9th. So that's when we will welcome new members and have a potluck and a pizza party following the service. Are there any other announcements? Okay, if there are visitors here today, we would invite you to sign the guest book in the back of the church. And this is a time that you should silence your cell phones or anything that goes beep or boop.
Good morning. My job as an introducer is to be bright, be brief, and be gone. Okay? I want to first introduce us to Jeff Sharlet. Okay? Jeff, we are a community here of, I guess, almost 200 years old. We have three characteristics. We are modest, we are curious, we are inclusive, and I would say we are recklessly inclusive. Okay. I want to introduce Jeff to us. Jeff, in the program you have, it does not reveal the depth of Jeff's experience with religious communities. And now, over the last number of years, he's been looking at political divisions. I know this is something that's very hurtful for all of us. I know that we will absorb what Jeff has to say word by word. And now I'm going to be gone.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me into this beautiful space, this beautiful moment, this congregation. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jenny Gilfin, for inviting me. I only learned just now that, Peter, that you are one of the organizers of Bookstock, and given the topic of my reflection, there's always this sort of question of what is to be done, what should we do, and so often my answer is, of course, more, but also this. This gathering, book stock in a time of book bans when libraries are being emptied or shuttered or closed. This is, to me, the most beautiful, vibrant, kind of democratic acts that we can undertake. So, and gathering together like this. The topic of my reflection is empathy for the devil, solidarity in the struggle. I was slightly worried coming to a Unitarian church if I talk about the devil, is that going to seem too hellfire and brimstone? But Richard, you set me up with that great reading, so I think I can address it. And I'll get to that, to empathy. The real key words are empathy, solidarity, and struggle. But first, I do want to say something about why I feel it necessary to engage the devil, air quotes, devil. I'm here today, I believe, because of a recent book of mine, which I made after 20 years of reporting on religious and political movements mostly within the US and also around the world, and many of them lovely, gorgeous movements and moments of imagination, but also many more fueled by the fear that can curdle into hate. And I think I can report accurately that the latter kind, the fearful kind, the hateful kind, has been growing into strength for some time now. The last 2 years in particular, I've been crisscrossing the country, taking its measure. And in that time, I've seen more guns than I had seen in 20 years of reporting on this space. One of the fascinating things to me was always that no matter where I went, I was actually always welcomed. People would say, and it might be some scary places, but people would say, well, it was no accident that you came here. God must have sent you. And they would always think they're going to convert me, but you know. Or they would say, no, I know you're a liberal journalist, you're just the worst, but it's okay because I speak the truth and my words will shine through. So come on in and we'll talk. Or even because they were motivated, especially Christian conservatives, once upon a time, by this idea, this peculiar American idea that free speech, the First Amendment, is scriptural. Bad news, it's not. It's a democratic idea. And the idea that conversation, that we might advance through conversation, and that we might speak our own minds, that is, in our context, a very American idea, with some religious roots. But that's changed. I have, in my reporting over the years, been on the wrong side of a gun more than once, but never before now in a church. In Nebraska, at a suburban megachurch with its own armed militia, more and more common now. A church usher and a gunman in full tactical gear followed me into a public parking lot to tell me that as I was a journalist, I was automatically, it was a given, there was no discussion or debate, I was demonic. No matter how polite I pretend to be. Of course, it's pretense, there's no possibility that I could really be polite. I was of the devil. And if this sounds, wow, that's crazy, that's very fringe, let it be noted that the pastor of that church is a frequent guest on a TV show that just hosted Donald Trump. And it is right in the main line of the contemporary Republican Party, and I say that with respect for those who may remember a different party. But so there I am, confronted by this gunman, and I'm a little frightened, and I knew that I should leave, but I got stuck on that free speech question, that conversation question. I had my notebook, and I always use a mechanical pencil. It's just how I prefer to take notes. And so I held up my pencil, and you know mechanical pencils, and you can click and the lead falls out. And I said, but I've just got a pencil. And you know, I'm trying to show that I'm harmless. And I said to the usher, I only have a pencil, and you brought this man with a gun. And the gunman steps forward, and the usher steps forward, and he grins. And it's a very frightening smile, and he just leans in close to close, you know, chin to chin. And he says, how do you know I don't have a gun? So, how do you know I don't have a gun? I think this is an American question now. There are 400 million guns in civilian hands in the United States. 400 million. And I am here to report that there are far more people than I've seen in my decades of reporting on the right who say they are ready to use their guns, who practice and train and fly American flags in which the stripes are AR-15s and the stars are replaced by handguns, or who fly American flags that show nothing at all. The color's gone to just pure darkness. The all-black American flag, and it does fly here in Vermont, that stands for, in the minds of those who fly it, no mercy, take no prisoners, kill them all. In the Civil War, that the ones who fly it hopes is coming soon. That's terrifying. So we might call this a crisis of democracy, just as we face a climate crisis. But I think a better word, and it's a word that I think allows for hope instead of cheap grace, for hope instead of what some have come to call hopium. Have you heard this term, hopium? Oh, don't worry, everything's gonna be fine. It'll take care of itself. I'm sure the glaciers will work things out and they'll come back, and the fires, we'll toast marshmallows. It'll be okay, and Trump's gone away. He's gone away now. I think a better word than crisis is our condition. The condition that we find ourselves, these circumstances, these very frightening circumstances, our condition. Because crisis supposes a resolution, a story, an arc, a beginning, a middle, and an end. What's going to happen? Will the ending be a happy one or a sad one? How will this resolve? What is the solution to the crisis of democracy? Will Trump win or will democracy win? Oh, democracy wins. Okay, we're all done. We don't have to think about that anymore. To which I always say, democracy is a constant process. It's not something you preserve like jam that you put in a jar. It's not something you have. It's something you get up and you make fresh every morning. There is no resolution to democracy. We don't want there to be a resolution to democracy. We don't want that crisis to be resolved. We want that condition to be struggled for. So I think crisis, I think, is the language of lies. And if I am going to use the devil and Satan, I'm going to say it's the language of Satan incarnate in our world now, which I think is the forces of hate and fascism. It is Donald Trump saying, now is a final battle. You are either with me or you are against me. If you do not vote for me, he did say this last week, if you do not vote for me, the world will be destroyed. That's it. Those are your choices. That's a final battle. In a Unitarian church, which I think leans a little less on revelation than some other churches, I think we can resist that kind of apocalyptic language. We can say our condition is one in which there have been losses. I speak of climate. It's changed. The glaciers aren't coming back. There have been losses in our democratic culture. There have been so many losses of the pandemic, 1 million and more gone. They aren't coming back. We can just sit there in our anger, or we can mourn. Mourning is the process by which we go on. Mourning is part of our condition. It's part of how we recognize what is lost and imagine a way in which we endure. How do we do this? The title is Empathy for the Devil, Solidarity in the Struggle. I want to speak of empathy as a method. And I want to separate empathy from sympathy. This is an important fact. I teach at Dartmouth College, and a lot of my students get confused, and they say, how can you have empathy for some awful person? Empathy is neutral. Empathy is understanding what it might feel like to believe that. As a writer of religion, this is what's always engaged me, to go to I like it when I go to a beautiful space and I say, oh, what would it feel like? What would it feel like to come every Sunday to this beautiful, light-filled space to listen to as people share their joys and concerns? That is a pleasure. But empathy is also called upon as a method to understand our condition, to take a measure of its condition that we might imagine something better. It means not sympathy for the devil, not sympathy for those who commit violence necessarily, but an understanding. I want to share my practice of this, a little passage from the book. This is how I tried to do it. She saw shadows. She always had. She was spiritual, not Christian. She'd left that behind when she'd left Waco in her early 20s. She got into Wicca. Super witchy, said a friend. She was fun, happy, a little wild, just a normal girl. I'll call her Evelyn because she's a hostage now, a captive of the beliefs that swarm any public mention of her real name. Not that she's special. She's not notorious. There are Evelyns everywhere. This Evelyn was in Austin. She was 30. She liked to party. She had a broad mountain girl face and forest-colored eyes, and her long brown hair ran to honey at the ends. She worked when she could. Sometimes she stripped. She had a boyfriend who took care of her. She had never had much luck holding a job. When she lost one, she'd go home. That's how it was. Back and forth, between Waco, her family, and Austin, her friends. Right to left, red to blue. She was bright. A good listener, says one friend, a liberal lawyer whom Evelyn called freedom fighter. She was gullible, says another friend, the one who introduced Evelyn to QAnon not long into the pandemic. Not because she believed in QAnon or thought Evelyn would, but because they were both bored, locked down, stuck at home, staring at screens. For shits and giggles, said Evelyn's friend. Which is how Evelyn came to believe that the shadows that she'd seen within Wicca as the nuances of life might be, no, were, actually the satanic forces of which QAnon warned. Q, she learned, was an anonymous figure on a message board. I think people are maybe familiar by now with QAnon, the conspiracy theory that has moved from the fringe right into the center of what was once American conservatism, this idea that there is a secret government official named Q who sends information about how Democrats are trafficking children and how Hillary Clinton is part of a murderous scheme and now Biden and so on, and how Trump has a secret plan to save us all. Q, she learned, an anonymous figure on a message board, was in fact a government insider. Q refers to a government security level clearance. So whoever is pretending to be this person is just alluding to that. Q revealed that President Trump's decades-old plans to destroy the deep state, the satanic forces. It's been going on for centuries, Evelyn wrote to her friend, freedom fighter. Q communicated through cryptic drops. That's what they call the messages. She thought this wise, the encryption. Q could transmit only to those willing to discern. Evelyn discerned. She followed the white rabbit. Q speak. She went down the rabbit hole. She drank more. Her mind raced. Her hair grew wild. Her skin became ashen, except when it flushed with color. She could feel her blood moving in strange ways. So what she did is eventually she became convinced by a number that is quite popular on the right now, which is that 800,000 children are abducted every year, which would be monstrous if it was true, and you would definitely know about it because it would mean kids would be disappearing from every school all the time. It's not true, except that what it means is 800,000 children are reported missing every year. About 98% of them are found within a few hours. Sometimes it's a custody dispute, sometimes a babysitter doesn't get a kid back on time. The numbers who are actually abducted, a terrible number, is in the hundreds. But Evelyn stopped at that 800,000 number, and she believed it, as did so many of the January 6th insurrectionists. And if you think that's happening, you've got to act on it. So she did, and she got into her car. She had a little red car, and she went driving, looking for these people. And she thought she saw them. And she began ramming into other people's cars until finally she settled on one 19-year-old student driving along and pinned her in a parking lot and rammed her car 8 times, and thank God did not do serious physical harm. But the trauma, of course, of that wounded her, and my sympathy is with that 19-year-old student. It is not with Evelyn. Evelyn made a choice. But my empathy is with Evelyn, because Evelyn is also a victim, and her life is ruined now too. And that empathy that makes me understand how someone who starts 30 years old, Austin, Texas, kind of a hipster, and comes to that place, that helps me understand both the threat and the possibility. The possibility, if you can fall into that hole, you might climb out of it too. So I warned against the conflation of empathy and sympathy, but I find that through empathy, I do also come to a place of sympathy for the mental illness that afflicted Evelyn. As a professor, I see young people terrified of the world in which they're coming of age. As a parent, I'm devoted to a child who struggles mightily with mental illness. Struggles. That's the key word of this reflection. I reject crisis because it implies resolution in either victory or defeat. Victory is a sweet dream. It's also the delusion that consumed Evelyn when she thought she could resolve her terror, her grief with violence. My child lives with mental illness. Even in times of well-being, they know the struggle continues. We live with climate change. We live with the specter of authoritarianism and even now a kind of American fascism. The struggle continues. As a parent, it asks of me love, of course, but also more than that, solidarity. My child is trans, and every trans child now in America is on the front lines of what I see as a kind of slow civil war. And I monitor these things so you may not realize that every weekend, at least in multiple places in America now, there are men with AR-15s who they don't fire, they line up outside libraries or schools or even sometimes hospitals, bars where there's a drag show, and they stand there with their guns. They stand there with their guns. Stand back and stand by, as Donald Trump said. Those children who are inside for a story hour, those children are on the front line. So my solidarity, our struggle, must be with those who are on the front line because they are us. Anything less is submission to the delusions that I think of as I understand, as the devil, that lie of division. The struggle demands not simply support, but solidarity. And I know this can be challenging to some folks who say, well, I don't understand trans issues, I don't understand. Here's what you can understand. I'll make it very simple. Is imagine a line of men with AR-15s. Imagine kids who gathered to hear a story inside. Which side are you on? Well, I don't like to take sides. I like to stand in the middle. Please don't stand in front of the men with the guns. Let's try and walk away from them. Let us be in solidarity. If my child is targeted, I am targeted. If I am targeted as part of this community, you are targeted. So we have to have solidarity. We have to lean on one another, hold each other up, invite those with the guns to lay them down and come in with us, but also stand in solidarity. This struggle demands endurance. And I want to close by speaking of how I opened this book with Harry Belafonte died recently. We lost him after 96 years. And the book is called Scenes from a Slow Civil War. And you say, what does Harry Belafonte have to do with that? That beautiful man, that wonderful singer, national treasure, and so on. Because I got to spend some time with him. Because Mr. B, as he was called, because Mr. B lived every year, every day of his 96 years, in both anger and joy. Joy, we heard in the music. The anger was there. He was instrumental to the civil rights movement. Harry was the right-hand man of Martin Luther King, Jr. And and yet he also lamented at the end of his days what he called the Hollywoodization of the civil rights movement. The idea that it was something that had happened, it had worked, hooray, it's over. The crisis resolved. No, the struggle is long. The struggle is long. He was in the struggle every one of his days for 96 years, and I want to close with some words of his. This is, Mr. B was thinking about all the times he'd been there in marches and afterwards. So often there would be something terrible happen. He said, we would do something great, and then the men with guns would remind you. We'd have a very successful march, boom, Medgar Evers murdered. March on Washington, then the 4 little girls. The 16th Street Baptist church bombing in Birmingham. Every time, he says, they're gonna let you know you didn't win. That's why he's been so angry for so long. It's what kept him alive. But where your anger comes from, he says, is less important than what you do with it. What do you do with it? What he's always done. You take it from the top. You sing your song again until they hear it like it's the first time. You make it your own, and then you give it away. I wanted to close with Deo, the Banana Boat song. Technical difficulties prevent us from doing that, but it's so well known, maybe you can hear it in your head. Daylight Common, we want to come home. It's worth knowing that Mr. B said, I want this to be a joyful song, but it's a freedom song. It's a struggle song. It's a liberation song, a song he learned on the docks in Jamaica, and he sang at civil rights marches. There is joy in that struggle and being in solidarity with one another. Thanks very much.